Welcome to IFAB Online.
Welcome to IFAB Online.
Benvenuti a IFAB Online.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to the International Fundraising Across Borders session on fundraising from North America for organisations in Europe. My name is Lauren Kendall, and my current role is Head of Transformational Philanthropy, North America, at the University of Manchester. I joined Manchester 2 years ago after 10 years in fundraising at the University of Oxford, and I specialise in principal gifts and international fundraising. It is my great pleasure to introduce our two wonderful speakers, Alessio Di Capua and Jill Slattery. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you. Hi, Lauren.
Hi. Jill is Director for Principal Gifts for the Americas at the LSE Foundation, and Alessio has just joined Imperial College London as Head of Development for their business school. Perhaps you could both tell us a little bit about your careers and time in fundraising to date. Alessio, would you like to start?
Of course. Thank you for the introduction, Lauren. Yes, my name is Alessio Di Capua. I joined the charity sector only about 13 years ago after a very varied career in banking and media. And I was a fundraiser for a very small children's hospice to start with for a couple of years, where I practiced my skills on community fundraising and then started doing major gifts. And that's what prompted me to move to the Royal Horticultural Society, where I was for 4 years as head of major gifts, and then the varied other roles that included eventually being in charge of the whole development team, so individual fundraising mainly as a focus. I then joined Kew Gardens, the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, as we call it, for 5.5 years as head of major gifts. And that's when my career in the last 2.5 years at Kew developed into fundraising in the US. And I was the executive director of Kew Foundation America for the last 2.5 years of my tenure there. And I then moved to the Eden Project, where I was director of philanthropy for 2 years. And as you said, I just recently joined Imperial College as head of development for the business school. So my contribution today will be mainly based on my experience within Kew and the Eden Project.
Amazing. Thank you, Alessio. And Jill, would you like to give some background of your fundraising and career?
Sure. So thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Alessio. It's a pleasure to serve with you on this conference. I have just started my 26th year in fundraising. I started in 1995 at Columbia University, and I was there for 5 years. And my first 3 years, I actually started out in corporate relations. At that time, corporate and foundations were actually a large part of Columbia University's budget. And we approached corporate relations very similar to how the university approached major gifts, is that we would meet with graduates of Columbia who were very high placed in Fortune 500 companies, and then ask them to act as advocates on behalf of Columbia programs and projects and work with us on soliciting and then closing the gifts. From there, I was there for 3 years and then was promoted to an area within Columbia called special gifts. And that was individual giving that was essentially a feeder into major gifts. And then was recruited to the University of Pennsylvania in their New York office. And I worked there for 2 years in major gifts. Back to Columbia, just 2 years later, working with law school graduates in New York, Washington, D.C., and Boston. And from there, I've been at LSE since 2005. And my first 10 years at LSE, I was director of major gifts for North America. And I'm now in my 16th year at LSE and took on principal gifts 6 years ago.
Wow, that's incredible for both of you. All right, so shall we get started on the session? Would you like to kick things off, Jill, by thinking if there's one thing that you want to tell fundraisers about fundraising in North America for Europe, what would that be?
Okay, so, I thought back just to my LSE experience, and I thought back to 2005, 16 years ago when I started at LSE. And the thing that struck me the most, I guess I would say in the first 1 or 2 years, is the number of people. So we have a graduate base of about 25,000 alumni in North America. 2,000 of which have a wealth rating, which is anyone who has the capability of making a gift of $100,000 and above to LSE. So that was sort of the portfolio from the beginning. And so those were my prospects. Those are the individuals that I visited with. And what struck me the most was they had I would say 90 to 95% of those individuals had never received a personal visit from someone at LSE before. So in many, many cases, I was walking into the graduate's home, their office. They graduated in the 1960s, in the 1970s, and they had never heard from LSE. So I don't know how many of you are in that position, but there's positives and negatives to it. The negatives are that individuals have been hearing from the probably 2 or 3 schools that they attended, the 2 or 3 schools that their spouse attended, and the many schools that their children have attended for decades. So we're coming in very late to the game. The positives is that the experience, I would say this is a generalization of most Americans going to school at LSE is very, very positive. And it's also very unique. You don't really compare the experience of LSE to an experience that they've had at their undergraduate or graduate American university. So number one, I would say listen about what how their experience was, what their interest areas are, and try to make that match. Number two is to be patient. Gifts, major gifts, certainly principal gifts, take a very, very long time. You often hear that it takes 18 to 24 months to close a major gift. It's much, much longer for a principal gift. And again, for people who have lifelong relationships with their university, when you're coming in at the very tail end, it's just very important to be patient, and it does pay off. The other things that I would say would say to thank appropriately, thank often, thank appropriately, and also steward those relationships extremely carefully. I'm not sure how many of you have seen this before at your organizations, but stewardship is an extremely, extremely important component for principal gift officers. We are seeing that your next big gifts are coming from people who've already made big gifts. So it's important to get that relationship right.
Thank you. Alessio, how does that compare to your experience?
Yeah, can I ask a very quick question? Sorry, just left. I think is really an important point, Jill. May I ask you one question? You mentioned about special gifts at Columbia being the feeder into major gift. Can you define what a special gift is by American standards?
Yes, that's the other thing that is also different from working at institutions in the UK. So an annual fund gift at Columbia could be any gift of up to $50,000. And a feeder into major gifts would be gifts of between $50,000 to $250,000. So I understand at many smaller nonprofits, at institutions that are just starting out, especially if they're outside of the United States, those are large gifts. And frankly, a $250,000 gift to LSE is a very nice first gift, second gift. But yes, again, American institutions, they basically have been, many of the development offices at Ivy League schools in the US were formed in the 1930s and 1940s. So, I mean, I can really just speak to LSE, but LSE did not have a development office in London until the 1990s. So already we're playing 50 to 60 years of catch up with US institutions.
I think it was very important. Thank you for explaining that, because I think the magnitude, the difference between the two countries is incredible. I mean, major gift in the UK, in my experience, is anything from 25,000, and to you is not even a special gift within the American institution, I think is very important point to make, because there are expectations are completely different across the pond. And I think the ability and the capacity of American donors is much, much higher. So sorry, Lauren, I've interrupted, but going back to your question, I totally share the view that Jill gave about listening. And that's one of the key crucial skills that I always say when younger fundraisers ask me, what is the key important skill of a major gift fundraiser? And I think listening is absolutely crucial, and understanding the motivation of the donor and the reason. And particularly important when, in my case, when I was working at Kew Gardens, when we were trying to pitch an organization which was entirely British and very, very quintessentially British, although with the scope and the variety of projects that was worldwide. But it was very important to listen to the donor and understanding why they wanted to support us, so that we could find the right project for them. I also suggest to be very direct in the communications. I think that's something that it's probably more that applies more to an American donor base. I think American donors, Jill, correct me if I'm wrong, they like that directness. I think British donors, sometimes they like, a bit more of a flowery communication. And I think you need to understand that. And I think that's really, really appreciated. And then be ambitious with your asks. I mean, Jill just told us about the different, the different levels of what a major gift is. Just be ambitious, and I think that's really appreciated by the donors. If you've done your work and you know what the capacity of the prospect is, to go and flatter the donors. That's really true across the world, but I think it works particularly well in the US. And absolutely go the extra mile with stewarding, within the constraint, obviously not do anything that is perceived to be, ridiculous by the charity or by the institution generally. But stewardship is absolutely crucial. I totally agree with Jill, and it takes much longer, and it's also much more expensive to find the new donors. Whilst if you're stewarding the same donor over a number of years and you keep them happy, then it makes absolute sense for everybody. It's a win-win. And build stronger relationship as you can. I found that I built myself. If I look at my prospect pool today, if I was still in an organization at Imperial, I mainly focus on prospects that are in the UK, so it's slightly different, sort of prospect pool that I have. But if I look to my relationships that I built over the years, the relationship with American donors are much, much stronger. I'm still in direct contact with many of them. We still exchange Christmas cards and birthday cards. They're much, much stronger, and they're almost friendships, some of them, which is incredible. And you take those for the rest of your life.
I think we probably both or all agree that great fundraising comes from great stories. So I just wondered if you guys have a really good story that you could share with people.
So, well, and I feel that I have so many different stories, and it's sort of cliche to use the story where it's the largest gift that LSE has seen, but I will use the story just as an illustration. So, the name of our largest donor to LSE, individual donor, his name is Firaz Lalji. He graduated from LSE in the late 1960s. An interesting story, his family, he was born in Uganda, went to school in Uganda. His family was forced out by Idi Amin in the early 70s, but he went to LSE and then eventually settled in the Pacific Northwest and went back and forth between Vancouver and Seattle. So this is one of those individuals that I described before, where he graduated in the late 60s. It was 2005. He was one of the first individuals that I met with, and he had never received a personal visit from the LSE before. We had some idea of his financial capacity, but we certainly didn't have an idea of the extent. We didn't know he was as wealthy as he is. So his first gift came, it was a $10,000 gift. We all know what to do with stewarding a $10,000 gift. We started including him and his family into our fundraising efforts in the Pacific Northwest, in London, with the president, with the other leadership of the school. His second gift was an endowed scholarship gift at $1 million for a Ugandan student. Now, this is all happening probably in the span of the first 5 or 6 years. He becomes more entrenched in LSE, getting to know the professors, getting to know other colleagues throughout the school, and he ends up forming a program called the Program for African Leadership. So already you're seeing the him building on his gifts. And then penultimately, probably sometime around 2015, 2016, he made a 10 million pound gift. He's now co-chair of our capital campaign and is considering something much larger. But I use that as an illustration of it takes time. This is a relationship. It takes time. It takes a lot of people. This is a relationship that, has been going on with the school for the last 16 years. It's been engaging him in North America. It's been engaging him on an advisory board. It's forming those relationships with faculty members. LSE, we've had in that time span 6 different directors of the school. So it's a different relationship every single time. And I feel fortunate that I've had the consistency of working with the Lalji family, but there are many, many people that have contributed to this relationship. And, you can only think with donors, we do have many other stories like that as well, but just the emphasis of the amount of time, the number of people that you have to have involved in these relationships. And also another thing that's important to note is that not everything was perfect all of the time. There were so many ups and downs where in the beginning, was this really a match? He's also a donor to several he and his wife are also donors to several other organizations in the US. Would they consider larger gifts to those institutions?
That's a great story though. And what a fantastic sort of relationship and build up from that initial gift of 10,000.
Yeah, I know. And the thing is, like, you do have to celebrate even those smaller gifts. Like in the beginning, in 2005, an American making a $10,000 gift to LSE was a big deal. So, we tried to recognize that gift just like he would have made $1 million gift.
That's very fortunate. Imagine if it happened today, you might not have given maybe the same stewardship at that level because you're maybe more blasé. Maybe
Yes.
the timing was right too. It's brilliant, brilliant story. Mine is a story of stalking, I say. It touches on the perseverance bit, I think. When I was at Kew Gardens, this is a story mainly aimed at those fundraisers that have a heritage, maybe a museum or a garden, something that is open. It is a post-COVID story, obviously wouldn't apply today, but it's a story that said basically, if you have visitors coming through your gate, that you should go and meet them whenever possible. And this is completely coincidental. I was coming back from a meeting across the garden at Kew Gardens here in London. And our office was in an very old building called Cambridge Cottage. And there is a gallery on the ground floor. And I have also a good knack. This is very important. You have to have a good knack of spotting high net worth individuals across the room, which I have developed. I don't know why. It's probably from my family. My mother was a very glamorous actress, and my father was quite a glamorous businessman too. So maybe that's what instilled me. I have no idea, but I can spot. I'm really, really very, very keen, very, very good at that. So anyway, I was coming back from my meeting, and I spotted this lady was looking at the gallery, and immediately realized that I had to talk to her. So we sort of connected, the eyes connected, and started talking. And she said, I said, isn't this a beautiful gallery? And just was explaining where the gallery was from. And I said, where are you from? And she said, from San Francisco. So we start talking. And I said, well, actually, I was in San Francisco last week. And she said, oh, you're a fundraiser for Q and you're in San Francisco. Why were you there? And she didn't know that we had a 501c3. So we start talking. And literally she says, look, I've got 10 minutes left. The driver is coming to pick me up. What should I do? And I said, you've got to see the Hive, this new exhibit that we had. You've got to see the Palm House, which is the very first visit to Q. And I saw it, took her out, and we literally spent 10 minutes, no more than that, with her, and gave her a business card. And she said, of course, I don't have business cards. I said, which is fine. And I didn't think much more about it. And I said, just enjoy the rest of your visit. And I left her there. 2 weeks later, an email arrives, and she said it was lovely to meet you. And she sent me a blog that she'd written about her travels through the UK, doing garden tours as her husband was busy with business meetings. And she introduced me. She used my name in the blog, which is really sweet. And anyways, just started communicating. Said, when you're back in San Francisco, let me know. So about a month later, I write to her and said, I'm coming back to San Francisco. Are you free for a coffee? And she said, I'm really, really busy. I'm really sorry. I can't have any time for you. I'm really sorry, but next time you come maybe. And then the day later, she said, actually, you know what? And we stopped communicating. By that time, she knew the people that we were engaging with in San Francisco. We were really trying hard to break into San Francisco and Silicon Valley, particularly recognized it was a really important area for Q to explore. And she wrote to me back again and said, I tell you what, I host a dinner for you. And that's how it started. And she opened up her house and hosted a dinner for 70. It was the most amazing house. And that it led. She didn't donate a lot of money herself, but the connections that I made that night and that opening up of the networks was absolutely crucial. So you might go down a path that you don't think is leading anywhere, but don't let go. And things will open up for you. And that was the amazing. If I link now the person that I met 3 stages down the road, that's where the big gifts were coming from. And it just came out to something that I felt was, not completely inappropriate. I hope it wasn't politically incorrect to just like jump on somebody and start talking to them. But the point is that you never know is coming through these institutions, and if you treat everybody with, if you're proud of the place where you work and you want to, tell people what they should be visiting, you never know who you meet. So be mindful of that.
And hone that high net worth individual radar.
Absolutely, yes, that's really crucial. Yes. Yeah.
Lauren, if I could just add, I don't want to monopolize the conversation with stories, but also just to Alessio's point, the importance of persistence. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's a donor that I contacted. It's almost unbelievable to me, for 13 years. So I tried for 13 years for an appointment. He finally said yes to an appointment last year. And I won't share his name just because it's private for now, but he has a business that goes back and forth between New York, London, and Paris. And 13 years later, he said yes to a first meeting. It was a very successful first meeting. He ended up coming for a visit to campus and telling us that he is planning to give away $100 million over the next 10 years, and that LSE is now going to be one of the top institutions. So it just goes to show you that just persisting with some of those prospects, like you would give up after 2 or 3 years of trying to get an appointment. And it is so much of what we do is about timing, and not just with closing gifts, but even just with starting the relationship.
You beat me completely, Jill. I think I say, I take no 3 times, and then the 4th time I just give up. Maybe I should revisit my strategy.
13 years, Alessia.
That's incredible.
The first time I met him, actually, I walked into his office and he was like, "Are you the Jill Slattery?" I mean, I was embarrassed. I mean, can you imagine pursuing somebody for 13 years?
It paid off though, it worked. So
yeah.
How did you stay in touch, Jill? Was that just sort of emails, or did you call him, or how did you sort of eventually get that meeting?
So actually it was pretty much, until the first meeting, it was all over email. And what happened was that I would send him, usually the way that I contact people for the first time is over email. So it would be an introductory email, but keeping it pretty brief, just saying, I'm a representative of LSE. We have a small New York office. I'd love to meet with you in New York. And he kept sending me back these like little tidbits of information. So it would be like, traveling too much, can't meet now. And then, so I kind of mimicked his style and was like, totally get it, see you next time. And then he would start sharing things like, I'm in Paris. So then I would start sharing some of my connections to Paris. But again, little quick bullet points, not a big response. And then it as strange as it sounds, you kind of get to know especially in 13 years, you got to know just little bits about that person's life. So then again, like I'm saying, when the time was right, we knew like little quick things about each other. And then, so when you met, it's almost like you certainly didn't have like a pre-existing relationship, but you knew a couple of things about each other. So it wasn't so foreign.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, email, this is kind of off topic, but email has been very successful for me.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to phone. I mean, I know some people that I've heard at conferences saying that they contact people by text. I mean, I don't, unless I know the person, of course, but I'm not a big like texter for a first meeting kind of thing.
No. How about you, Alessio? How do you usually
No, I agree. Email mainly to start with, and then events. Whenever we have events, trying to invite people, particularly now with online events, it becomes a bit easier to make that sort of qualification when you never had any contact. But I totally agree with you. There is a big debate within my colleagues as well, with not here necessarily by my past, about using WhatsApp and text messages. And I agree with you. It's just too personal to start with. Once you get to know people, absolutely. Yes, but to start with, no, I agree. I wouldn't like myself to be approached that way, so I wouldn't do it to somebody else.
Should we go on to logistics a little bit? I remember at my interview for Manchester, someone on the panel asked me how I'd cope with being on the road so often. And I've definitely had times when I've come back to an empty hotel room after a meeting and felt a bit lonely. So how do you guys cope with that side of the job? Have you got any tips for would-be international fundraisers?
I quite thrive on the adrenaline rush when I'm traveling. And I have quite, this is my personal experience. And I've been actually sort of described very politically incorrectly by a very senior colleague of mine in my previous organization at Kew Gardens as a slave driver. So I just like go and pack the schedule, because I'm also aware of senior, particularly scientists and senior members of the team's time. So if you take them to the US, you want to pack everything in 2 or 3 days. I have a very, very understanding husband. So he travels a lot too, because he's an entertainer. So that makes it easier in terms of, being used to don't have any children. So that makes it also obviously easier. I understand that different people have different experiences. And I have a very sort of greedy cat that becomes very grumpy when he sees a suitcase, but then I discovered that he was very, very addicted to hemp mice, which I could only find in San Francisco. So whenever I was going to San Francisco, I would bring back a bag of hemp mice, and he was very happy. His grumpiness would go away. So on a serious note, I would say that that's the way I coped when I was traveling a lot, is that adrenaline rush and knowing that you will make a real inway, given all the stories and the experience that I had in the past, that it was a very profitable use of my time anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say, and believe me, it's been extremely difficult at times, more so earlier in my career at LSE. But we have, I mean, what's kind of interesting now in my principal gift portfolio of 60, only 5 are in New York City, and our office is based in New York City. So you have to be willing to travel. What I mentioned before, just about the 2,000 rated prospects, they were all over North America. So, and it does get exhausting. And in the beginning, I was traveling probably to a different city every week. And sometimes it is more exhausting to go from New York to Washington, D.C. than it is to go from New York to Los Angeles. So there is an element of just, you have to embrace the travel. It is harder on your body as you get older. And I mean, but things that I would do absolutely in any city that I went to, I usually, have some family members or some friends. So try to see them. It's a nice way to keep in touch with people that are close to you. I also would subscribe to different magazines. And I actually learned that when I was working at the University of Pennsylvania, only 2 hours, Philadelphia from New York. And I kept saying, I was spending a lot of time in Philadelphia, and it's very close, but I didn't really know anything that was going on with the arts and culture scene. So I would subscribe to some of their local artist magazines or Philadelphia magazines, check out their restaurants just in your downtime to feel that you're more, to feel that you're contributing a little more, learning a little more. You can talk to prospects in those regions about different things. And you're just like a more interesting person. And then, I mean, in terms of going back and forth to London, it really, I mean, that to me is a real joy. I mean, just to get to know colleagues over a long period of time, in my case, and to explore London and to be there. Yeah, it's never really a hardship for someone in New York to go to London for business. So I think London colleagues would say the same thing about New York.
Likewise,
And,
yes.
and actually, weirdly, I've been in the same amount of time that I've been in fundraising. I've also been in New York City, and being in any city like New York or London, it's not easy all of the time. 26 years in New York City, you live in small spaces. It's very expensive. All the issues that we're familiar with. And it actually got me to enjoy living in New York more as well.
I guess with the pandemic, everything's sort of changed for all of us with international traveling. So how have you adapted this year? And, you know, how has your job changed since lockdown and travel restrictions, that sort of thing?
Again, I keep going back to the fact that the length of time that I've been at LSE, which is fortunate during the pandemic, because the relationships have been there for 16 years, and it was easier to transition to an online environment. So I think I do hear from colleagues that they are meeting people for the first time on Zoom, soliciting on Zoom for the first time. I think that would be extremely difficult, but I think it is possible. I mean, I will tell you one thing that I have done in the last couple of months that I'm very proud of. So we have a new chair of council, basically a new chair of the board of trustees. She's American. She's originally from California. She splits her time between California, London, and Paris. And so I thought, well, something that would be good to do over this time would be to see if I could introduce her to my principal gift portfolio. That's 60 people, and they are spread out all over the US. As I mentioned before, only 5 are in New York City. We had such a high rate of return of people saying that they wanted to meet with her, that she has now probably met with 50% of my portfolio. I have a waiting list of people who want to meet with her when her time then frees up again in December. And our researcher in New York was just saying to me, he's like, Jill, this would have taken years. I mean, you know, she's meeting with people who are based in Denver, in St. Louis, on the West Coast, in the Pacific Northwest, Florida, Texas, you know, East Coast. And we were able to probably meet with 25 to 30 individuals in the course of 3 weeks. Wow. And there's absolutely no way that would have happened had this situation not presented itself to us. So I think just in turn, you know, we're doing the same thing as so many other European institutions are doing, being creative with lectures and Zooms and meetings and introductions. But yeah, I mean, embrace it as long as we have to. But I do think donors and prospects are getting sick of it too. I mean, I just hear all the time, like, it'll be nice to see you at some point in person. So there is an end to this, but yeah, try to do as much as you can online.
Yes, the same experience, really. I was talking to my colleague, Shona, who does the American fundraising within Imperial College, and
we love Shona.
We love Shona, yes, she's wonderful. And she was saying that the online events, the ability of having all these online events, the program of online events, which we developed at Imperial since lockdown, has been incredible tool for cultivation. And take completely, Jill, how lucky you were to have, you know, the combination of the new council, the chair of the council, and the lockdown. I think it's a perfect combination for doing that. But at cultivation level, I can see the benefit of it, but there is nothing that will ever replace the human connection. You know, when you get into further stages, particularly when you start, you know, soliciting and asking for a gift, and then even the stewardship, you know, a handshake or an elbow bump, whatever we're going to be left with for the rest of our lives. That's really, really important. And I think, but yes, we're perfected, the techniques have been perfected, with with the Zoom and other online tools. But I think that replacement of that human connection will never cease. And I would highly recommend actually something that really, really useful for a British organization when fundraising in the US, but anywhere in the world really, is whenever we're allowed to, of course, having events, is that building very strong connection with the foreign office within your own country, but also with the embassy of the country, like the US embassy here in London is really, really important to be able to enter those circles of expats who live in the country. And I was very fortunate when I was at Q, I had a very good relation with the head gardener at the Winfield House, which is the residence of the British or the American ambassador here in Britain. And this was the pre-Johnson's days, as in, Johnson as the American ambassador Johnson, not the prime minister, very confusing. And it was great, a great opportunity to engage, but also with the foreign office, the British Foreign Office in America. And we had some amazing events at the various consulate offices in New York, in Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco. They're really, really crucial. And sometimes charities forget about that. And it's a duty of the British, at least the British Foreign Office, to actually deliver these sort of services to charities. So I would highly recommend that once we're allowed, of course, to travel again.
Yeah. I think sort of on that, really crucial relationships and building those links between people in North America and the UK institutions. I find that difficult sometimes. I'm just wondering what strategies you have for maintaining those relationships and building that sort of relationship back up.
I mean, that's continuously a challenge for us, is that, we have to bring LSE to North America. A great way is obviously capitalizing on invitations to campus. I mean, LSE sells itself in the middle of London. And so inviting people back to campus. Faculty members and leadership of the school have been great. We have regular major gift dinners in most in cities where we have large concentrations of major gift prospects on a regular basis, probably every 6 to 9 months if we weren't in COVID. So yeah, invitations back to campus, use of faculty members, and but I mean, getting back to and then connections with colleagues as well. So we have some fundraisers from London do travel with us in the US, and that's wonderful too, because they bring something that I can't bring. I mean, we're in a small office, and they can bring sort of the news from LSE directly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. I completely empathize with that and agree with that. I would also add linking prospects to each other, so have that sort of connection, peer-to-peer connection. A lot of the prospects and donors really enjoy that, knowing that they're in a group of peers, in a group of people of the same stature, if you want. But yes, I've spoken to Shona again, a lovely Shona, and she agrees with that in terms of having, talks, and that's her challenge when she goes to the US on behalf of Imperial. Was the challenge that I was facing when I was at Q, is to bring the academics with you. I've never ever met a prospect or a donor that wants to talk to the fundraiser only. And Jill, you're the proof. It took you 13 years to fix it. I think the guy got just desperate and decided, I want to see her so that she could pop my back. Right. But it's true, on a serious note, nobody wants to talk to fundraisers. They want to talk to the experts, whether it's the scientists or so. To make that connection is really important. And travel will be really important to reestablish that, because a Zoom call doesn't really do it.
So that was one of my kind of challenges. Do you guys have other challenges? What would you say are the biggest challenges to fundraising in North America?
So, actually a lot of times, some of the most difficult parts is actually finding the match of the gift opportunity and the prospect. And really kind of also pitching at an appropriate level. And I think that just has to do with the maturity of some of the organizations compared to US schools. Let me just give a couple of examples. So, and this really kind of is earlier on, but there were many years where at the LSE, where let's say an annual fund gift would be recognized at anything from 1 to 10,000 pounds. And then basically you could make a current use scholarship gift, which would be in the range of 30 to 50,000 pounds. And then if you jump to endowment numbers, the numbers would go up to high 6-figure, low 7-figure millions. So we never really had a middle. And it's we have had several success stories actually in the US where people have jumped from $0 to $1 million. It's extremely rare. And especially with people really, if you look at US institutions giving, there's a progression. They start, the first year they graduate, they give $100 for their reunion, for their 10th year reunion, maybe they're giving $1,000 for the 25th reunion more. They gradually get involved until like a 7-figure gift is made. So that frankly, and to tell you the truth, it still is a challenge, finding appropriate level giving opportunities for prospects, even major and principal gift prospects who are first starting to get involved in the university, because it shouldn't be an all or nothing. It shouldn't be you can make a 10,000 pound gift or you need to make a £1 million gift. It happens over a very long period of time. And also, I mean, just in terms of finding the interest area, you guys have probably had this experience where in your first pitch, you just talk about the things that we always talk about: student support, financial aid, faculty support, building support, any, projects that might be pillars of a campaign. But sometimes it's several meetings later where you really don't hone into what they're exactly interested in. And that process can just take a very long time, especially when you're managing so many prospects remotely.
The challenge for me personally, if I talk about Imperial for a second, is the fact that our business school is the youngest faculty. So we are a STEM university. For those who don't know, we are a STEM university based in London, Imperial College, where, engineering and natural sciences and medicine are the largest faculties, and business was only added about 15 years ago. So it's very young. So the alumni, a very small number of young alumni who have not reached that level of career where they could make a major gift. So that's the major challenge. In terms of what Shona shared with me, Shona does fundraising for us across all faculties. So the challenge there, of course, is to have to deal with a lot of academics and a lot of different projects and be in charge and in command of everything that's happened. That must be really, really challenging. So I'm very fortunate that I only have to talk to a few, academics, and they're very specific in their area of expertise. The other feedback that Shona gave me actually is that she does it, sometimes she gets too involved and too distracted by the schedule of travel of the scientists. So she wants to be with the scientists all the time, but there are so many across all different four faculties that it becomes really impossible. So if she's driven by that, then she finds herself that she spreads herself a bit too thin on the ground, I think. So she handles too many things, and in the end, she gets distracted, and that's also potential danger. So her recommendation would be to focus only on a number of specific projects that are highly fundraisable, and just work on those.
Great. And so on the flip side to that, what do you both love about fundraising from North America? What's the joy that it brings?
So for me, I mean, it's absolutely building the relationships between our donors here and LSE. And it is amazing, again, after so long, that, you can look around the campus and I see where North American prospects have made a huge difference, whether it was for our last campaign, whether it's for naming buildings, naming programs, leadership now at the school. That is absolutely the most satisfying. It's just building these networks and these relationships that are lifelong opportunities.
Yes, to me is it's that as well as the generosity that goes well beyond the gift. So negotiating and closing a gift is the most satisfying thing about the job, in my opinion. That will never be replaced by anything else as a fundraiser. The sensation that you come out of a meeting with a big check, that is done purely on philanthropy with no return on investment, and it's just that sense of it's phenomenal. But it's the generosity I find, particularly with American donors, and I said that a couple of times already, that goes beyond the gift. So the opening of your own home and the welcoming of the organization. If you really like the organization you are engaging yourself with, you open up your home and you have that peer-to-peer connection immediately, where the owner of the home and the homeowner stands up and says, "I'm here supporting Alessio, and you should be doing the same." Is just fantastic. Yeah. And the introduction to friend circles, whether it's within the home or in other ways, it's phenomenal. And I don't find that with British donors, not as much as with Americans. I think there is a very different attitude and an expectation, self-expectation of giving back. I think that I just saw yesterday just a wonderful interview, David Letterman interview with Melinda Gates. Oh my God, it was mind-blowing. She's such a tremendous lady, and the fact that you realize that that sense that you reach the top of whatever you're doing, and that you need to give back, because there is the only way that the society can build really upon is for somebody in their position, the position of the Gates, is to actually give money back and help the government. So what they do, they take in risks and developing something that then the government should scale up. And it's just amazing. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's just fantastic. And I don't see that in Britain, British philanthropy as yet. There are a few visionary philanthropists, but not as many as you find in the States.
Yeah, I think I would agree. So we're coming to the end of our time. So as we kind of wrap up, this is your opportunity to speak directly to international fundraisers. What would your final words of wisdom be, Jill?
So final parting words of wisdom would be, I think international fundraising is an excellent, I'm very glad that I've pursued it. I think it keeps life interesting. I would say build the relationships, ask questions, and actually something that I usually put on all of my briefing materials to leadership of the school or to faculty is, and to have fun, because that is one of the most important parts. Is this, this should be fun. Of course it's stressful, but try not to get the stress. Try not to absorb too much of the stress.
I totally agree. Be direct would be one of the first thing I said at the very beginning, and then build and listen. We said this a lot, actually. Listen carefully to what the donor wants, and be bold and build the strongest relationship. And absolutely, the fun bit is absolutely crucial. Absolutely agree. Because if you portray that sense of fun, people will want. I had a donor once, sorry, another little story about a donor I've been pursuing for a while, about an American lady who lives here in London, about a donation for one particular project that we were doing at Kew Gardens, a £50,000 project. It was the temperate house restoration at Kew Gardens, and it was the last £1 million. So we've asked 20 people to donate £50,000. And I spoke to her once, and I just dropped it, said, "This is what we're doing if you're interested." And then we were at an event, and she met another couple of the donors that were donating at that level, and she realized that there was going to be a very fun group to be in. So she came to me. I didn't have to ask her for the second time. She came to me, a glass of champagne in her hand, said, I'm going to do this," and she hugged me. And I said, "Let's talk tomorrow." I said, we were having it. It was probably the third glass of champagne by then. It was a very, very lavish little party. And I said, "I'll ask you again tomorrow." And that's the sense, that sense of belonging and sense of fun, really, really important to create much stronger relationships in the long term.
And the other thing is that, like, the relationship between the US and the UK is a special one. And I do think, I understand what Alessio is saying, that Americans might be perceived to be more welcoming, or your friends quicker kind of thing. But I have to tell you again, going back to just how long I've been at LSE, I mean, some of my best friends now and my best relationships are people that I've met through LSE. And just what I say to people is the cultures are different, and it just takes a little longer. And by little, I mean, I do mean years, but it just takes a little longer. But when you are friends, the friendships are there, and they'll be there forever.
So both Manchester and Oxford have a 501c3, which I'm guessing LSE and Imperial have too. But do either of you have any advice for people starting to fundraise from North America from scratch? Any tricky tax or issues that people really need to be aware of?
So our office, and I'm actually not the person to speak with this. We do have a director of research and operations. That's one of the 6 positions in the New York office. But we actually have 3 different organizations. So we have the LSE Foundation, which technically is our employer for the 6 of us in the U.S. So the LSE Foundation is our employer, and the LSE Foundation also accepts gifts from foundations. So from family foundations or also from institutional foundations. We also have a 501c3, which is the American Fund for LSE. Everyone on this call will know what the 501c3 is. And then we actually have another organization, which is a volunteer-led organization. And that is the American Friends of LSE, and that's out of Washington, D.C. So I think our setup is much more complicated than Oxford or Cambridge's setup. I think the institution would have to consult an attorney and a tax lawyer to figure out what is best for them.
I think there are probably 3 different ways in which you could set yourselves up. There is a very simple way, which a lot of charities do, which is the CAF model, Charities Aid Foundation, or an organization like CAF, where you don't have to have any infrastructure, any governance. And basically you ask donors to donate through CAF, and then CAF transfers the money to the organization. That's the most simple. And I know of a few charities that embrace that. Then there is absolutely what Jill described, which is what I had when I was at Q, which is a 501c3 and a foundation. We merged the 2 when we were there, but we didn't have obviously the capacity, the build up in terms of having an office. We opened an office eventually in Chicago, but we were very small to start with, and therefore we used. And I don't have any sort of interest or any shares in this, but I highly recommend Chapel in New York. We were using Chapel in New York throughout my tenure there, because they do all the admin, and they run, the 990s, all the different paperwork, which is very, very complicated, very complex, and can give you headaches, particularly when you are the executive director or the treasurer secretary, which I was for a period. When you are ultimately responsible, the last thing you want is a call from the IRS. So that I would highly recommend using an organization like Chapel in New York. And then, of course, the third stage is what Jill described, which is the expansion and the physical presence, where you can then take everything under your umbrella and run it, which I'm sure is what happens with Jill. That the office runs everything. And I think that's the situation we have at Imperial. As I said, I'm not very aware of the Imperial situation, because I just joined and I don't do fundraising in the US, but I believe we do. I do know we have a foundation and a 501c3, but I don't know what else the structure. But yeah, so I would suggest one of those 3 routes.
Yeah, I should comment here just about having a physical space in the US. LSE has had a physical space in the US since 1999, and our office has basically fluctuated anything from 2 people to 6 people. Oxford and Cambridge both have extremely large offices. I think one is 25 and one is 40 people. They have grade A office space, beautiful office space in prestigious locations. And we're often asked about, from UK institutions, should they have a physical presence in the US? I mean, I tend to think that it's, if the institution can afford it, it's better to have a space than not to have a space. I mean, there's shared space options, donated space options if you can find them. But I mean, I just know for myself that covering California is hard enough to do from New York. I can't imagine trying to really cover California while also living in London. It's possible, people do it. I know London Business School has had some success with it, but I think like being able to cut down on some of the travel is a good thing.
That's what I do in my role. So I'm West Coast focused from Manchester. So, and it is tough. I think last year I was on the road every month pretty much. So yeah.
Yeah, and if you're covering California it must take you, door to door, that would be 16 hours just to get to the city, just to get to San Francisco or LA.
Good job. It's lovely when you get there.
Yes, very true.
And so kind of fundraising has changed significantly since I started. I'm sure it must have since you guys started as well. And it's becoming ever more professional. I completed my diploma in fundraising this year, and I just wondered whether either of you have fundraising qualifications or belong to professional organizations that you'd recommend.
I have no qualification whatsoever. That's why, but I know that we're benefiting obviously within the university sector from CASE membership to CASE. And that's, I know that Shona told me that it's really, really valuable to her as a source of information. We got different membership to organizations like Inside Philanthropy, Chronicle of Philanthropy, Alliance Magazine, and the Foundation Center, which we find really, really useful sources of information about what's going on in the philanthropic world in the US. And that's as much as I do. But no, I'm a fraudster. I don't have any.
Definitely not.
That is actually one of the fun things about the fundraising profession is you don't really need any qualifications. I mean, for me, the best fundraisers are just interesting and interested people.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, I have I have an undergraduate degree, I have a graduate degree, and my graduate degree is actually in public policy. Not that that's exactly has to do with fundraising, but ironically, it has to do with LSE. So it's just a discipline that interests me. And so again, I keep finding when I was at Columbia and with LSE, I find the substance of the strong areas, the strong academic areas of the institution of interest. So it keeps me interested in the place. Two things that I would absolutely recommend. I'll make a plug here for an organization that I'm actually on the board of in New York. It's called Women in Development. It's an organization of 600 or 700 fairly senior women in the fundraising field. Great organization. There are monthly luncheons. There are all sort of other programming things throughout the year. You can join from anywhere, but it is a very nice network of individuals. And another plug for CASE. And specifically last year, I attended the International Fundraising Conference. And I think it's hard for us sometimes to find conferences that are applicable to exactly what we do. Mm-hmm. And that one is the one that I found that is most resonated with me.
Well, that's a lovely sort of way to wrap things up. Thank you both so much. I've really loved hearing about your stories and your wisdom and your inspiration. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Jill.